Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and you are watching a new episode on the Wojennik TV YouTube channel. Today I would like to invite you to a trip to France, and to be more precise, to the Atlantic coast, to the city of Rouen. At the beginning of the 16th century, Rouen was the major French port on the Atlantic, and it is from there that French ships went into the open ocean in order to fish cod or herrings. They then returned to port where fish were unloaded and sold at the Rouen's market. In the game which I will be showing you today, which is called Upon a Salty Ocean, we will be able to recreate those events by becoming merchants of the epoch, trying to acquire the most number of gold coins, so to become the most wealthy merchant in Rouen. The game was released in 2011 by Giochix.it and Rio Grande Games. It was designed by Marco Pranzo. It is meant to be played by 2 to 4 players aged 13 or higher, and the time of play is from 90 to 180 minutes. Now, the game, as I said earlier, is an economical game because we will be trying to acquire the most number of money, but not only buying or selling fish. We will be also investing in buildings located in Rouen. Some of those buildings, which will be presented on the game board, are still there in contemporary Rouen. So this is also a game about Rouen's history. Now, this game went pretty unnoticed while released in 2018. What was the reason of this fact, and is it really a weak game? Is it a game which went into oblivion because it is uninteresting? I will try to respond to those questions during the final conclusion. Firstly, I'd like to show you the components of this game, then I would like to explain you briefly how the game works, and at the end, my final thoughts and the final verdict. So let's begin our journey to 16th century Rouen. Here is the French city of Rouen at the beginning of the 16th century, and also the board of Upon a Salty Ocean prepared to a two-player game. As I mentioned earlier, you can play Upon a Salty Ocean from 2 to 4 players, and those types of games will be pretty much similar. The rules governing 2, 3 or 4 players gameplay will be very similar, with some subtle differences. Those differences will concern the number of available spaces in the city of Rouen when players will be buying new buildings, and the second difference will also govern the number of fish used in the game, because while playing 3 or 4 players game we will be using 2 types of fish, cod and herrings. If we play a one-player game, if a two-player game, we will be using only herring pieces, so no cods in two-player games. Now, what elements we will be using? As I said, the first one and most important one is the game map representing Rouen. On this board we have a lot of things going on, and firstly we will have some buildings. Those buildings will be occupied by players during the game, and each time a player decides to occupy a building, he will place his own cube on a space denoting control. As you can see, each building has its own name, a certain number of spaces which will be used in accordance to the number of players which participate in the game. For instance, here in the Académie de la Marine, we will be using only 1 space if playing a 2-player game, but 2 spaces if we play a 3 or 4 players game. Each building will grant us a special benefit. This benefit can be something that we will be using during the game, or this building can give us additional income or money at the game's end. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of buildings, and those will be the most important part of the game. And to play this game correctly, you really have to browse to the rule book in order to see what each of those buildings does and what benefit it can grant to you. Now we have two buildings in which we already start the game with some cubes. The first one will be the saline, which will be a building producing salt. Salt will be extremely important because thanks to salt you will be able to not only fish the cod or herrings on the ocean, you will be also able to transport them to Rouen. Because fishing is only half of your mission. You will be not only fishing, you will also have to transport those fish back to the port and then sell them at the market in order to receive income. The second building, which is already occupied at the game's start, is the depot, in which you will be tracking your number of resources which can be stored in your personal depot, because each player will have their own personal stockhouse. Now on this board we will have additional information. We will have some tracks which will be used in order to track some info. The first one will be the action track, on which 4 black cubes will be moved alongside the track in order to show the current price of the 4 different types of actions available in the game. Each time a player makes an action, one of those cubes will be moved to the right, and the price of such an action will increase in accordance to the numbers printed on this track. The second small track is the turn order track, on which we also place one of our colored cubes in order to indicate who is first player, who goes second, third or fourth. The final track on this side of the board is the market the market track, which indicates the current price of the 3 resources used in the game. Now, as you can see, this price can change during gameplay, and those cubes each time will be used to track the current price of the 3 resources. Those 3 resources are salt. As I mentioned earlier, it is absolutely crucial to stock salt in order to transport fish. We will be using big cubes, which are meant to be 5 units of salt, and single small cubes, which are 1 unit of salt. Alongside salt, we will be using 2 types of fish. Now, the first one will be cod, which will be purple, and the pink cubes will be the herrings. As I said earlier, in 2-player games we will be using only the pink cubes and only herrings. Cod will be used in 3 or 4-player games. We have one additional track. This will be the event track, on which event tiles will be placed. As you can see, 5 of them. Those tiles will have 2 purposes. The first one will be to influence the price of the 3 resources on the market. Secondly, it will also show the events which will happen during each turn. Alongside those two purposes, this track will also measure time, because we will be playing 5 rounds and the game ends when the last round is finished. On the board, apart from the city of Rouen, we have also the ocean space, to which our ships will be sent in order to fish, and it's a separate space on the board. Each player will be using a certain number of pieces. The first one will be the cubes, which will indicate our current wealth. In Upon a Salty Ocean, your objective is to become the richest player, the richest merchant, and our wealth will be measured by those cubes, which will be moved alongside the track which is on the border of the board. The second type of resources used by the players will be their player's board. Each player receives their own individual player board, on which 4 spaces are being presented. The first one is your depot, your stockhouse, in which you will be stocking resources such as salt or sometimes fish. The three separate parts, boxes, represent your ships. You have the possibility to use up to 3 ships during the game. You start the game with already 1 ship build, which starts the game in the city, in the port of Rouen. The 2 other ships can be built during the game, and if you do build them, you gain access to the two additional boxes. You have 2 small ships which can stock up to 4 resources and 1 big ship which can stock up to 6 resources. But it is of course the most expensive one to build. Each player receives also a certain amount of cubes which will be used to indicate the property of buildings. As I said earlier, during the game you will be placing those cubes on dedicated spaces on the board in order to keep track of control of the buildings, which can grant you some benefits during gameplay or at the game's end. The final element, used both before the game and sometimes during gameplay, will be the rulebook. Now this is a rulebook written in 5 languages: in English, in German, in Italian, in French and in Dutch. And this is the reason why this booklet is so long, because it has 24 pages. But don't be afraid, the rules occupy up to 4 or 5 pages in each of the languages. Now, I have read the French and the English rulebook. They are well written, the rules are well explained. The most important part of those rules are, of course, the parts which are describing the buildings, because you get really a couple of them in the game, and it is absolutely crucial for you to understand how they work in order to know what benefits they can grant. So this part is the most important one. You also receive some historical notes, which is always a nice addition, even in a Euro game. Now, as I said, the rulebook, in my opinion, is well written. I found both the English and the French well laid with some examples. I had absolutely really no doubt how to play the game after reading those rules. And those are pretty much all the elements which you will be using during a play of Upon a Salty Ocean. Now let's take a brief look at the rules and at how the game works. The goal of each player in Upon a Salty Ocean will be to acquire the most possible number of gold units, and those gold coins will be recorded, as I mentioned earlier, on the track bordering the game map. Each turn, and we will be playing 5 of them, will be played in accordance with a turn sequence. We will be playing 3 phases. The first one during each and every turn will be the events phase. It is always played at the beginning of the turn, and during this phase the corresponding event is activated by checking market prices and weather conditions. We verify the tile which is currently face up and which corresponds to the current turn, and firstly we change the price of the 3 goods on the market. In this case, for instance, the price of salt would not change, but the cod and the herring price would increase by 2, so we should increase those prices. The second aspect is to check the symbols underneath to verify what weather conditions will apply during this turn, and we have several ones. Here we have the symbol of the pirates, which informs us that the first ship which will exit the harbor of Rouen will be damaged by pirates. The second symbol shows calm ocean, which indicates that there will be no danger, which can sometimes occur if we have the storm symbol, which also can damage ships. The third symbol shows us poor fishing. 1 barrel of salt will be discarded from every ship going into the open sea and it will not be transformed into cod or herring. So the fishing will be less efficient. Now, after resolving this event, we also return the next tile in order to see what will be the price changes and what will be the events during the following turn. So the players, knowing that, can plan ahead. The second phase, which is the most important one during each turn, will be the actions phase. During this phase, each player will have the opportunity to make some actions. First of all, we always have to check for the price of such an action, because here we will be using this track which shows the price of each type of action at a given moment. At the beginning of a turn, the price of each action is zero coins, so we can just do it without paying anything. But after finishing an action, the cube is moved one space to the right. So the next player who wishes to do the same type of action will have to pay for it. And so on. So those cubes will be traveling to the right up to the point where all players pass. Paying for an action requires to move our disc to the left on the gold track. It is possible to even go below zero, but by doing so you have to pay one more gold unit, so it's more expensive. Furthermore, if you're still negative at the end of a turn, you will have to pay one gold unit of interest. If you fall to -22, you are unable to do any further actions. Now, the players will play those actions, paying their price until everyone passes. What those 4 actions enable us to do? The first action is the city action, which allows us to build buildings in the city. So this is a very intriguing and very interesting part of the game, because we will be trying to occupy places which will grant us some benefits during the game, and also which will grant us additional gold units at the game's end. We can, for instance, buy an auberge, which will increase our income at the end of each turn. Additionally, we will receive additional gold units for each player who doesn't have an auberge. When buying a building, we place our cube on such a spot. If there are some places which have only one spot, because we are playing, for instance, a 2-player game, the other player won't be able to buy such a building, and we will be controlling it until the game ends. Now, there are some very important buildings. I won't be describing all of them, but in general, some of them will grant us some benefits during gameplay. For instance, they will enable us to repair damaged ships. They will enable us to receive additional gold units during gameplay. And some others, like the Notre Dame Cathedral, will grant us a lot of coins at the game's end. This is an interesting building, because here all the players will be racing against each other in order to occupy the last possible space to the right of the track. Because as you can see, if you end up at the far right while playing a 2-players game, you will earn 45 additional gold tokens at the game's end, whereas your opponent, reaching 35, will be 10 coins less richer. So less rich. So it is important to invest in Notre Dame, but it's not the only solution to receive additional gold units at the game's end. There are some other important buildings, for instance the saline, which produces salt. You can increase your production by investing in this building. You can, and you also should, invest in the bank, because at the game's start you have a certain limit, maximum of gold units that you can possess at the end of any turn, and this is 40. In order to increase this limit, you have to buy a bank. In order to further increase this limit to surpass 80, you have to invest into a treasure chest or a treasure chamber, which will increase your maximum gold capacity to more than 80. So you will be able to have an unlimited amount of gold units. And this is important because at the game's end, as I said earlier, we check the number of gold units, the number of gold coins that each player has, and it's the wealthiest player who wins. So it's absolutely crucial to buy both the bank and the treasure chamber. You can also invest in the depot, so in your stock house, which will increase the number of resources that you will be able to stock during a turn. You start with a capacity of 6, but you can increase it easily to 15 or even 30. Now, the second type of action used during gameplay will be the navigation action. And this is pretty simple. The first possibility is to sail from the harbor to the open ocean and to fish. So you just pick up all your ships from the harbor and you travel to the ocean. Here you can exchange all the barrels of salt aboard your ships to fish, because you just grab the salt on your fish and you can fish herrings or cod, replacing each salt barrel by a fish cube. Of course, if we have poor weather, so poor fishing, one salt unit will be discarded without obtaining a fish. You can fish both for herrings or cod, or you can decide to fish, for instance, only cod or only herring. The second action concerning navigation is, as you might expect, returning from the open ocean to the harbor, with, of course, the fish that you managed to fish earlier. The third type of action are the harbor actions, and here you have two possibilities. The first one will be to transfer your goods between the ships and your stockhouse. So you can decide to move your resources from one or even two or three ships to your depot. You can also choose to load your ships, for instance, with salt, because when you obtain new salt, it is placed on your stockhouse, and from here you have to transfer it to your ships in order to once again go to the ocean, fish, exchange those salt units against fish cubes. The second type of harbor action is constructing a new ship. As I said earlier, each player can have up to 3 ships. At the moment when the shipyard and the Marine Academy are being constructed, each player can build a new ship, paying a certain amount of coins. Owning those buildings enables you to construct them cheaper. Here, if you do not control them, you have to pay those coins to the players who manage to build those buildings. The last type of action is the market action, thanks to which you can sell or you can buy resources on the market. Buying resources means that you can choose one resource type and buy a number of your choice by paying the current price of this resource, placing those resources on your depot. The second possibility is to sell resources from your ships or from your depot or from both of them, obtaining a number of gold coins equal to the current price of the good. While doing so, you reduce also the price of such a good. If you are playing a 2-players game, this price will drop two spots instead of 1. So this is a way to obtain some additional money, because in general in this game you will be trying to maximize your income by fishing and selling those goods at a good price. After each player passes, the turn ends, because it enters a very short reset administrative phase, which is the last phase of each turn. During this phase, some buildings some buildings will grant additional income. The cubes corresponding to each action type will be reset to 0. Players who still are at a negative number of coins have to pay their interest. Some additional buildings are activated. The saline produces additional salt, which is stocked in each player's depot. And we pass on to a new turn. We play 5 turns in sequence, and at the game's end we add additional gold coins in accordance to the rules governing each of the buildings. Now, I won't be describing all of those buildings because this is not a tutorial of Upon a Salty Ocean, but a review of this game. So rather than explaining those buildings, I would like now to pass to a conclusion. I would like to give you my final thoughts about this title. Upon a Salty Ocean is a game which is a part of a broader family of economical games. I am a huge fan of this family of games because I like Brass, I like Le Havre, so when Upon a Salty Ocean was released, I almost immediately bought it. I do not know why, it was something of an impulse buy. And after so many years, this game still remains in my collection, even though the game went pretty unnoticed while released. I have brought it several times to my table, I have played it with my friends, with my son, and always I really enjoyed it. So, if I were to give you a final verdict, is this a valid product? Is this a product which is worth to be brought to a broader public? I would say definitely yes. And let me explain in a few words why. First of all, I believe that Upon a Salty Ocean is one of the prettiest games that I have ever played. Now, I have seen hundreds or even thousands of games, and really a few of them are so attractive in this look, in this visual aspect than Upon a Salty Ocean is. I love the artwork used in this game, and looking at this game is for me a real pleasure. Now, I understand that you should never judge a game based on its look, but if a game is both pretty and also enjoyable to play, then it is ranked much higher than only a game which is interesting to play. And if a game is so pretty that I like to lay it down on my table just to look at the elements, this means that this game really scored a home run. And in my personal ranking, I would rank Upon a Salty Ocean in my top 10 of the prettiest games that I have ever seen. Now, there are of course some elements concerning both the components aspect and maybe the visual aspect which could be done a little better. For instance, the depot boards are a little bit moving. So when placed on the table, they are not lying flat, and you sometimes have the feeling that really just touching them makes them turn around or be displaced. They could be more flat. Secondly, in my opinion, if something could be done better with the board, the information about the buildings, for instance the digits used, the font used, could be a little bit bigger. It would be easier to see the information about the buildings from far away. Now, it is not a big problem, but it could always be done better. Having said that, when we judge the game based on its components, on the quality of those components, I believe Upon a Salty Ocean is a very high quality product. Secondly, what I really like in Upon a Salty Ocean is the fact that when playing this game, you really have the feeling of being somewhere at the beginning of the 16th century and being a rival to other players who are incorporating merchants. You really feel like a merchant in Rouen at the beginning of the 16th century. I like the way that the theme and the setting were mixed together with the mechanisms. It is all very logical, it is all very climatic, and it works extremely well. From this point of view, it's a good design because I like games in which I have the actual feeling of doing things that the game wants us to represent. And in Upon a Salty Ocean, I really have this feeling being aboard a shipping vessel, or then being a merchant or a cathedral builder. I have each time making an action this actual feeling. The third thing which I really like in Upon a Salty Ocean is the fact that there is no one dominant strategy in this game. You have several ways to achieve a really high score. Now, when playing this game for the first time, you might think shipping and selling fish, it's the only strategy playable. But in fact, you have several others. You can not only send your ships in order to ship cod or herrings and then sell them. You can speculate on the market. You can buy fish when they are cheap and then sell them when they are more expensive. You can invest in the Notre Dame Cathedral. You can invest in other buildings. You can invest in the shipyard to become the player to which funds will be transferred when other players will be building their own ships. So there are some decisions to take, and you do not have to take always the same steps in order to increase your money. At the same time, the downtime in this game and the time of playing a game are really very attractive, because the downtime is pretty much zero. Why? Well, because even if it is not your turn, you should always carefully look at what your opponents are doing. Now, the most important aspect in this game, the most important part of this game, is the actions track, where something of a mini game always takes place. Players will try to make the most number of actions possible, at the same time paying the least money to do them. Sometimes we will be seeing races at the end of a turn in order to be last. Be last, why? Well, because the last player starts the next turn, and this is a major advantage. If you know that your opponent has 3 gold more than you, it's absolutely worth to be behind your opponent. Those 3 gold units can be quickly gained, and at the same time you will be paying less for the actions that you want to execute. Also, you will be able to execute the most crucial actions. For instance, you will be able to sell fish when your opponent has a lot more of them, in order to reduce the price that your opponent will receive for those fish when visiting the market by himself. So a lot of decisions to take with really intuitive rules, and those are things that I extremely like in every game, not only in economical games. So what, in my opinion, are the weaker points of this title? Because as most games, this is not a game only with strong points. The first aspect, which in my opinion could be a problem, is the fact that although the game has really intuitive and quite easy to learn rules, you get a quite high number of buildings in the game. So before playing, or when playing your first game, you might be a little bit confused. You might look to the rule book a lot of times in order to see how those buildings work. And understanding how they work is really part of the game. It enables you to plan ahead. It is also a crucial aspect in increasing your final score. So you have to always know when and where to invest. In order to do this, you have to know how the buildings work. So although the game is quite easy to teach, quite easy to learn, it will take you 1-2 games to understand which buildings are the most important ones, because not all of them are of the same importance. So maybe an additional player's aid would be a nice addition, where those buildings would be described, because on the game board you have some symbols, but to be frank, they are not always very clear. And only looking to the rulebook, you can be absolutely sure how those buildings work. Now, the second aspect, which in my opinion is a question of preferences, your preferences, is the fact that Upon a Salty Ocean is a very confrontational game. This is pretty rare when it comes to economical games, because in most economical games your main objective will be to maximize your own result. Here in Upon a Salty Ocean we will be having a lot of backstabbing, we will be having a lot of interaction with the other players. We can go to the market to sell just one fish in order to make the price of those fish drop and to forbid our opponent to acquire a considerably higher amount of money. You can buy a building, a place in a building, just to forbid this place to our opponent. You can take another action just in order to increase the price of this action for our opponent. So a lot of decisions, a lot of moves, which will be not only moves enabling you to improve your own position, but also which will hinder the moves of your opponents. Not every player likes it. Not every economical game has such an amount of negative interaction in it. So Upon a Salty Ocean will not suit everyone. If you like confrontational games, this can be a really interesting choice, especially if you are keen on economical games. Concluding, Upon a Salty Ocean is a game which, when released, went pretty unnoticed. It is a game which deserves to be brought back to the light of day, because it is a very interesting, a very well made design. Fantastic when it comes to the artwork, very pretty, at the same time very interesting, full of interaction with your fellow players. A game which can be easily played in 90 to 120 minutes. I would definitely recommend you to try it. This was a review of Upon a Salty Ocean from Giochix.it and Rio Grande Games. Thank you a lot for watching this video. I invite you to look at our other videos. We have also some reviews and some unboxings. See you next time and have a fantastic day.